The time is now 8:30, and I'd like to call the October 25th, 2024 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council to order. Mr. Secretary, could you please call the roll?
Kent Howe,
Here.
Cindy Condon,
Here.
Marcy Grail,
Here.
Ann Byer,
Here.
Richard Devlin,
Here.
Katie Imes.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Are there any agenda modifications?
Mr. Chair, there are no agenda modifications at this time.
Okay. Well, I have the following announcements. Please mute your phones, and if you're joining us by phone and receive a phone call, please hang up from this call and dial back in after finishing your other call. For those signed on to the webinar, please do not broadcast your webcam. For agenda item E, public comment period, there's two ways to let us know you are interested in providing comments to the council. For those using the WebEx, you'll need to use the raise your hand feature. For those on the phone only, you'll need to press *3, which will alert us that you want to speak. And we'll go over these options again during the agenda item. If you want to receive future email notifications of council meetings, project milestones, or rulemakings through our Click Dimensions program, you can do so by clicking on the link in the agenda or on the council webpage. Look for the green box on the right-hand side of the page that says sign up for email updates. You're also welcome to access the online project mapping tool and any documents by visiting our website. Please note that the audio and video of this meeting is being recorded and may be posted to the council's website following the meeting. Energy Facility Council meetings shall be conducted in a respectful and courteous manner where everyone's allowed to state their positions at the appropriate times consistent with council rules and procedures. Willful accusatory, offensive, insulting, threatening, insolent, or slanderous comments which disrupt the council meeting are not acceptable. Pursuant to Oregon Administrative Rule 345-011-0080, any person who engages in unacceptable conduct which disrupts the meeting may be expelled. So we'll move to the consent calendar, and the first item is approval of the August 22, 23 of 2024 minutes.
Approval.
Okay, I have a motion. I believe that was Councilor Devlin. Do we have a second?
This is Ann. I would second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Secretary Cornett, could you please call the roll?
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Kent Howe,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Katie Imes,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Marcy Grail.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So Secretary Cornett, I guess we're ready for the your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with council member updates. So Vice Chair Condon's first term ends this December, and she has submitted her information to be reappointed for a second term. So anticipate that'll occur in December as well. And then the governor's office, I believe I had provided this before, but the governor's office has expressed interest in replacing Perry Choctoot with another tribal representative. So we've recently reached out to all of the tribal governments of the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon to see if they are aware of anyone who's interested on being on FSEC. So I'll keep you informed on any updates as they occur. So probably not in 2024, but hopefully in early 2025, we'll have that position replaced. Next, I have 2 project updates. These are both about amendment determination requests or ADRs. So we've received 2 of them since the last council meeting. And I'll give a little bit of background just on what ADRs are, just in case, as a It's a reminder for everybody. So an amendment determination request is an optional process where a site certificate holder can request an evaluation about changes they are proposing to a facility and whether or not those changes trigger an amendment. Certain changes automatically trigger an amendment. So for example, a transfer of ownership of a facility or the site certificate holder of the facility, or designing, constructing, or operating a facility in a manner different from the description in the site certificate. If the proposed change, and I'm going to read off three sort of kind of triggers, and these are the ones that we refer to as the three coulds. So the first one is could result in a significant adverse impact that the council has not previously addressed, could impair the certificate holder's ability to comply with the site certificate condition, and could require a new condition or a change to a condition of the site certificate. So, if we determine that though any of those three coulds are triggered, then an amendment is required. So in an amendment determination request, the site certificate holder has to provide enough information to verify that those things are not triggered. So both of these amendment determination requests, they are obviously proposing that they do not trigger an amendment. And so the rule requirements for both of these are the same. Once we receive an ADR, we are required to post it to the project website. Once the department issues its determination, we send that to the certificate holder, council members, and we post it to the project webpage. The department also has the option to defer its determination to FSAC. So we could just simply say, we think it's better to take it directly to council. But if the department does make a determination at the first council meeting following that determination, it will be provided in the council secretary report. And then at the request of a council member, the department must refer its determination to the council for concurrence, modification, or rejection. So, if we make our determination and either you disagree or a council member disagrees, or you simply want more evaluation, you can request that be brought up to council for your evaluation and your determination. The certificate holder also has the ability, if they disagree with the department's determination, to have that raised to council as well. So the first ADR is for the Boardman to Hemingway project. And as you are likely aware, that is an approximately 300-mile long, 500 kV transmission line from Boardman, Oregon to Hemingway, Idaho, and would be located in 5 counties in Oregon. It was approved by council in September 2022 and has since received approval for 2 amendments, the last one being August of this year. And the project has not yet started construction. We received the ADR on October 11th from Idaho Power, and it is related to the relocation of the approved North Cap reactor station from adjacent to the Bonneville Power Administration's Longhorn substation, so that's where it's currently approved, to a new location approximately 15 miles south, adjacent to a PacifiCorp station called the Maverick Station that is currently in development in Morrow County. So the new location, obviously the old location or the currently approved location is in the micrositing corridor, and their proposed new location is also within the approved micrositing corridor. So the ADR has been posted to the project page, and we did provide a courtesy email. There is no requirement for us to provide email notifications, but we did do a courtesy email on October 21st. The second ADR is for the Daybreak Solar Project. This is a 140 megawatt solar PV generating project in Wasco County, east of Maupin. Project is currently under construction and pretty close to operation. We received the ADR on October 17th from the certificate holder, who is a wholly owned subsidiary of Avangrid Renewables. The ADR is related to a financial institution acquiring legal title for some of the facility equipment and then leasing that same equipment back to the certificate holder pursuant to a long-term lease. The certificate holder would continue to control, possess, and operate the facility. questions whether the sale of facility equipment would constitute a transfer of the site certificate or whether an amendment is required because of the three coulds that I mentioned also previously. So we're looking at that in relation to everything. So the ADR has been posted to the project page, and then a similar non-required but courtesy email was sent yesterday. So it's possible that both of these ADRs, we will make the determinations prior to the next council meeting and bring them in November, but we are still in the process of evaluating both of them and have not made any determinations yet. Any questions before I move on?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, and there'll be plenty of time to talk about those in the future as well. So the next one is related to a possible Bonneville Power Administration presentation. So we brought this up before, and I think we had heard also recently Councilmember Vice Chair Condon was certainly interested in receiving a presentation from BPA. So I have made contact with somebody, and we are kind of working on a potential presentation early 2025. So what I had indicated to them is the council would be interested in an overview generally of the BPA transmission system, an overview of the interconnection process, and then they had offered to have somebody from their National Environmental Policy Act permitting section come and talk to council about how their permitting review works. So those are the three, I mean, those are pretty big things, but those are the three things that are on, what I've been talking to them about. Is there anything else that as I move forward with coordinating with them, council would like to hear? You can also provide me more specific information related to those three topics if you'd like.
Sounds
Chair
like
Howe?
Vice Chair Condon.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Todd, for pursuing this. I don't know if anybody else attended the transmission planning workshop that Todd had sent an email with information about it. And part of the my request for this was triggered by that meeting and the work that's being done on transmission planning overall. And one of the key things that I took out of it was frustration by the public in terms of involvement at the early stages of planning. And so I'm wondering if they might cover their engagement with the public on their planning process.
I can absolutely add that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilor Devlin.
if possible, I'd like them to add to the presentation anything on changes in technology, perhaps their plans to implement any changes in technology.
Okay, I've made note of both of those and make sure that those get included as well. Anything else?
Any other suggestions? I guess not.
Okay, and then my last topic is future meetings. So the next council meeting will be on Thursday, November 14th in Madras, and we will be starting in the early evening, likely at 4 o'clock. So Chair Howe, Vice Chair Condon, and Councilmember Byer have indicated they will be in person. Council members Devlin and Imes have indicated they will be remote. So as long as that gives us 5 council members, and there's likely a decision on a site certificate. So we want to make sure we have as many council members as possible. So that gives us 5, and Councilmember Grail will be on vacation. So if we can, if everybody else is available, that will allow Councilmember Grail to enjoy her vacation without having to call into a council meeting. Okay, so I'm going to take silence as verification of everybody else. December, we have the dates of the 12th and the 13th. We have not yet made a request to Chair Howe for the meeting, but we do have numerous annual agenda items. So we will likely need to have a meeting on Friday the 13th. Probably it will go through the early afternoon, but we won't need the Thursday time, just the Friday. And since there are no specific location drivers, we will likely request that the meeting be in Salem, but none of that's occurred yet. We still have to put together a potential agenda and send it to Chair Howe for his verification of that, but just giving you all a heads up about that. And then finally, the 2025 dates. Nancy has sent out potential dates to council members to receive your feedback on those. She sent that out on Monday, the 21st, just in case you haven't yet seen it. And please make sure to respond to her in the coming weeks. And so at the November meeting, I'm assuming we're going to have those dates verified and concluded, and I will share those with everybody at that meeting to make sure everybody can kind of book those dates on their calendar. And unless there's any questions, Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
Any questions from council? I'm not seeing any, so okay, thank you, Secretary Cornett. And I'll move on to the next item. It's a radioactive material transport-free rulemaking. This is an action item, and Max Woods, Assistant Director for Nuclear Safety, will present us with the proposal. Max, you're on.
All right, very good. Thank you, Chair Howe. Members of the council, thank you for having me today. Tom Jackman is also online, and I might need some help on some of the administrative steps involved in rulemaking, and Tom can cover that in. But yeah, thanks for having me. Max Woods, Assistant Director for Nuclear Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and here to talk about a rulemaking proposal, kicking off a rulemaking project, I should say, that we're seeking your council authorization today to proceed with. We'll talk a little bit about the background of the scope of the project. We'll talk about some suggested RAC members. I'd like to have a RAC on this rulemaking project. And we'll ask for a council decision, as the last bullet says there, on starting the project and the RAC. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Tom Jackman, can you cover this one? Just as a general step of the rulemaking process.
Happy to. So the we are at the beginning of the rulemaking process here. Sort of outlined that there's 5 major steps. We are at the initiation of the rulemaking, which is also known as the informal phase of the rulemaking. And this is where we just pitch the sort of scope and direction of the rulemaking. Obviously, the development may change a little bit, but the general scope shouldn't significantly deviate from what we're setting out to do today. So that's where we're at. So this slide is here just to give you an idea of where we're at in the process. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
The very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so council, these don't come up for discussion very often. And in fact, as you can see on the second to last bullet there, the fee hasn't come up for discussion in quite a long time. Council may or may not realize that it's in rule, OR 345 Division 60, is pertaining to transportation of certain radioactive materials and permits and associated fees that's required of haulers of those materials through the state. And the directive comes from statute, ORS 469603. As a note here on the slide, we have a system set up where ODOT, as you might imagine, ODOT issues the permits to the transportation companies that are hauling radioactive material. The fee is collected by ODO. We collect the fee, and the sort of structure is it's established in rule, but it's sort of called for in statute to have this sort of split structure. We use the fee money almost exclusively for training of emergency response personnel. as it notes here, on issues of radiation and transportation safety. So the money comes in from the transportation companies. We in turn, ODO in turn, issues contracts, intergovernmental agreements actually, to Oregon State University and to the Oregon Health Authority, as well as our own staff time. And sort of between those three parties, ODO, OHA, and Oregon State University, to conduct training courses for emergency response, first responders, hazmat crews, and other various folks who might be involved in responding to a transportation accident. Those courses are held a couple times a year. We do a class in Corvallis at OSU, and we have a class in Northeast Oregon, Pendleton, Hermest area. And starting next year, we're going to start moving along the I-84 corridor. We'll go to LaGrange and then eventually to Ontario and sort of kind of cover the region where most of the shipments occur. The fees haven't been increased since 1983. The fee for, if you're interested, it's $70 for a permit for each shipment. There's a maximum cap on an annual fee that's set at $500 for haulers of sort of a subset of those types of material. And the fee hasn't been touched in quite a while. So we're holding this rulemaking, as you can sort of just infer, that because the money has not kept up with inflation and has not kept up with sort of the program needs to conduct what we think we need to do. And so we're coming here to start off the rulemaking, and we'll have a RAC that will have input from various stakeholders, and then come back to council with a recommendation. I will say, maybe I'll talk a little bit more about, there's a couple other points here I just wanted to make. You might ask, well, how are you running a deficit? How are you covering what you're doing right now? It's an interesting sort of history of the funding. I suspect at the time it was established in 1983, it was sufficient. It's probably more than sufficient. And the transportation fee pot of money built up a big surplus in the 90s and early 2000s. And the records that we have show that we are sort of steadily eating into and consistently eating into that pot of money, and we're spending more on an annual basis than we take in, and that funding, or our sort of source of funding, doesn't keep up with our needs. So we're borrowing money that was accumulated in an earlier time, and so we still we do what we have to do. We have these transportation safety courses. But the funding is going to run out within, we estimate, 3 to 5 years at current spend, and so we need to make a change here to make sure that we can keep doing what we're doing. So that's on the fee side. There's also a few other scopes of this rulemaking that aren't on the slide here, but that are in the staff report. This is the RAC membership. We go back one more. The staff report mentions sort of 2 other components of this rulemaking that we'd like to at least talk about with the RAC. One is around shipments via train of radioactive material. Right now, the rule specifically excludes train shipments only, so it only applies to truck. So we would like to at least consider how train shipments could or should be paying into this fee to support their fair share. And the other component is to do maybe a risk, we call it a sort of a risk-scaled approach towards the fee structure. What I mean by that is, in particular, liquid material, of which there is sometimes large quantities of liquid radioactive material shipped across the state, in my mind, carries a higher risk should there be an accident than solid material. And so we'd like to explore whether there should be a sort of a graduated fee scale depending on the sort of the makeup of the material that's being shipped across our roads. So those are 2 other scope items that we'd like to consider in the RAC, as well as the fee itself. And so that would sort of constitute the scope of the rulemaking. I should have mentioned at the beginning, the permit is required. So the rule triggers to federal Department of Transportation. They call them placarding. It's those little signs that are on the back of a big truck. And when I say certain radioactive material, that is sort of a nod towards the types of radioactive material that have to have a permit are actually from federal statute, and your rules point right to the federal statutes for when a permit is required. We do that to be consistent, so that if a truck requires a permit from the feds, they also require a permit from the state. and that we don't want to have deviation or confusion amongst haulers. So that there's a rationale as to why it is, and that's why I say certain radioactive material. And it's the radioactive material that is of more energy, more risk, higher levels of radiation that are subject to the permitting. Okay, so that's the background and scope. The next slide is about the potential RAC members. Of course, us, Department of Transportation, Oregon Health Authority, I mentioned, specifically the Radiation Protection Services Division. We work closely with them all the time on a host of things across the state. Oregon State University's Radiation Science Center, which does the training, and is also a state center of excellence for radiation science and engineering. We'd like to have first responders on the RAC, local governments, transportation carriers, of course, should be on the RAC, and I think some business associations, particularly the Trucking Association, should be on the RAC as well. And just yesterday, I was trading emails with the Trucking Association's president, and she would like to be on the RAC as well, so like confirmation there. So that's what I think should be on the RAC, but of course, would welcome discussion about membership and if there's other organizations that should be on there as well. I think that's the end of the slideshow here. Any questions?
Excuse me, Max. Sorry. Chair Howell, this is Marcy.
Yeah, Councilor Grail.
I apologize. So I'm just looking through the list, and maybe my brain's not keeping up yet, but I don't see anybody from environmental advocacy or social justice or anybody in those categories. And over the last little bit, we have heard a lot. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'd be curious if anybody else has a thought about it, but I would hate to not consider such and then be perceived some kind of way. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Vice Chair Condon.
And thank you. I agree with Marcy's comment. And I also don't, if we're considering rail transport, I'm wondering if there might be a representative from that area of transportation.
Yeah, that's a good idea. The train companies.
And also just a question, and I admit reading statutes and whatnot is sometimes I get mired in it. In the statute, just reading through it, there is a reference to highway transportation for consultation, but not rail. Can you? Does the statute contemplate rail?
Patrick and I had talked about this before, and maybe we'll take a second look as if highway is specifically called out, that maybe there's something we missed in that consideration, and make sure that we are legally on the right track. It's in rule, particularly where we look at it, that says trains are excluded. And in my reading, I didn't think that rail was by statute excluded, but it could be. So Patrick and I will look into that closer before we proceed with that component of it. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilor Imes?
Yes, I was just curious. You had mentioned, Max, that a lot of the activity is on 84 in Eastern Oregon. Is that correct?
It's between I-84 and I-5 corridor. It's both those two transport. I mentioned I-84 just because we do as a training course, we're sort of making our way along I-84 sort of year by year. We're trying to make sure that we're more inclusive of folks to get to where people go. The I-84 corridor between I-82 to Hermiston and then I-84 down towards Ontario carries a lot of material to and from Southeast Washington State. And in the Tri-Cities, Washington, Richland, Kennewick, Pasco, near the Hanford site, as well as there's sort of a center of nuclear power production and radioactive materials and sciences, as well as the Hanford site cleanup. And so there tends to be shipping of materials to and from that location through our state. On the I-5 corridor, it's I should step back and say most of the material that's shipped through our state is medical. Most of the radioactive material is related to medical treatments. that's sort of the primary material that's shipped.
Okay. And so I was just curious, you have first responders on there and local government, and I was kind of curious if you had any ideas for those spots, if you were going to, look at areas that would, most likely be involved in an incident. So, in those areas that are, actually seeing this kind of activity, did you have any ideas on those two positions?
I do. Thank you for asking that question. I do. Umatilla County would be on my list from Northeast Oregon, and Multnomah or Portland area county would also be on my list. We could also talk to the Association of Oregon Counties and see if they in general want to be on the RAC, or if they have other recommendations for counties that might want to. But in my mind, the Portland metro area as well as Umatilla or Northeast Oregon County would be probably the right choice.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Howe?
Yes, Counselor Byer.
Thank you. Max, nice presentation. Great idea to catch up fees with expenditures. Are the haulers themselves responsible for training their drivers, or is there training available to the haulers themselves since they pay the fee? Thank you.
Yes, that's a good question. The truck drivers do have to be trained. They have to have a special license in order to handle placarded radioactive material. So they have to go through their own set of trainings as well. And that's at the expense of the trucking companies, to be honest. I'm not really sure. The state doesn't pay for the truckers' certifications.
Great.
We handle the first
Thank you.
responders.
Thanks for the clarification. And it looks like a good project.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Could I ask Chair Gray if she had any organization? I'm sorry, I guess you're not the chair anymore, Marcy. Councilmember Grail's recommendation on an environmental group that she might want to be on the RAC, if you have anybody in mind.
I do not. I'd look at Secretary Cornett for such things. Or Tom has been dealing with a lot of them, and his role as rules coordinator is just from the folks who've come through. And Max, we're on 8 years now, just so you know. So
I know.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Counselor Devlin.
back to the issue of railroads. I believe Burlington Northern and Union Pacific are the two largest railroads serving Oregon. But I think one or both of them may have representatives in terms of lobby in the legislature. That may be a quick way to find a contact because they're both huge organizations, and finding a local contact might be pretty difficult for them.
I appreciate that. I'll take up that advice.
Vice Chair Condon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I forgot to say thank you for being here. And yeah, great presentation.
Thank you.
An introduction to the subject. I am wondering if in the fee section, I don't see anything that addresses a review of fees every so often. And I'm wondering if we can put it in rule that the fee must be reviewed at least every so often and adjusted for inflation at a minimum.
I would like that. I think that's a good idea. So we don't have to wait 41 years before coming back to council and talking about the fees.
Yeah. And just as a general comment, this is the second fee that we've run into this that I know of. And I'm wondering if we can look at all of our fees and have that review required in rule, just as we're looking at our rules and amending them as necessary.
So Tom here, yeah, that's definitely something we can take a look at. Although I don't know offhand any other fees that we have, because a lot of what we do is that charging people is a direct charge. It's related to the cost of the services provided. But yeah, I agree with you that we should be potentially looking at this more holistically in terms of tying things to inflation to the extent we're allowed to by statute.
Thank you.
Chair Howe?
Yes, Secretary Cornett.
Yeah, to respond to Vice Chair Condon's question about fees, we have a fee schedule. It's mandated by statute that it gets updated every 2 years. So that'll be brought to council in likely December, possibly January, but likely December. And really it sets the fees for a notice of intent, and then kind of other things. But as Tom exactly indicated, really we're fee for service. So even though those fees are set, and updated every 2 years to reflect, what the last 2 years have shown us, ultimately it's fee for service. And so if we charge a certain amount and we don't spend that, we return it. And if we charge a certain amount and need to spend more, we'll invoice them for more. We, have very clear direction that every charge has to be reasonable, just, necessary. So that's why we account for our time like attorneys, down to the half an hour level, of every day. So, but yes, you will be seeing the, fee schedule coming up probably in December.
Thank you.
Any other comments or suggestions? Okay, Mr. Woods, did you have anything else?
I think we just need council's deliberation and vote, I believe.
Right. Okay, well,
Thank you.
You did a great presentation and it's been good discussion and comments. So does someone want to make a motion?
Chair Howe?
Yes, Councilor Byer.
I move that the council initiate the radioactive material transport fee rulemaking with the scope and objectives recommended by staff, and as we've added in today's discussion, and also that we approve the creation of a rulemaking advisory committee as presented in the staff report, with the additions of an environmental/social justice group and potential railroad representatives. I also recommend that the council delegate the authority to appoint specific members to the department.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
This is Councilmember Grail. I second the motion.
Okay, we've got the motion and a second. So Secretary Cornett, could you please call the roll?
Yeah, before I do that, just for clarification, I did make note of the adjustments to the motion language. So thank you, Councilmember Byer. Okay, Ann Byer.
Yes.
Cindy Condon.
Yes.
Richard Devlin.
Yes.
Marcy Grail.
Yes.
Kent Howe.
Yes.
Katie Imes.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, Mr. Woods. Good presentation, good discussion, and got us where we want to be, I think. So the next item is the carbon monetary offset permanent rulemaking, another action item, and Tom Jackman is the rules coordinator that'll present this item. Tom, the floor is yours.
All right. Speaking of fees, so today we're here to discuss the possible permanent rulemaking adoption for the carbon monetary offset rulemaking that we've been engaged in these past few months. Go ahead and go next slide. So just by way of, we're going to do a little bit of just a brief background, a quick review of the rulemaking language, which will be real fast, if you'll recall, and then the council can, of course, consider adoption of the permanent rules. Go ahead and go next slide. So unlike the previous rulemaking action item, here we are at the end. We have gone through the development, the notice of proposed rulemaking, and had a formal public comment period, during which we received a few comments, and we'll get to those in a second. But go ahead and go to the next slide. So just as a reminder of what this rulemaking is about, it is laid out in statute there, as you can see in ORS 469503, that the council has the authority to, in rule, increase or decrease the monetary offset rate, which needs to be based on basically, as you might imagine, the evidence of what the cost of the offset should be, and that offset is economically achievable. Next slide. So the statute also describes that rate increase can be no more than 50%, which is sort of an unfortunate reality given how long a long period of time passed without the rate going up or down. Although perhaps this rate is less relevant than it used to be given the reduced likelihood of future natural gas developments or emissions related projects. However, we don't want to put ourselves into a bind where we do have more emissions authorized, but then we didn't adjust the rate. So here we are. So as of July, it was exactly 2 years since the previous rate change, which was July 2022. And so that's the point at which we can now raise the rate. So we are now beyond our 2-year period and are now authorized by statute to increase the rate by no more than 50% or decrease it. A maximum increase would take the existing rate to $6.40 per ton of emissions of CO2. Next slide. So staff is proposing today that council approve a rate increase to 50%, which will take the existing rate of $4.27 per ton of carbon to $6.40. Next slide. So all of that you've heard before. So now we have the public comment period where we allowed the public to comment on what you just heard. And we received 2 comments submitted during the public comment period. The second of which was from a host of environmental organizations, and the first was as well. So we basically heard loud and clear from our environmental organizations in Oregon, including some I hadn't even heard of, and almost all that I had, that they were heartily endorsing this 50% increase to the carbon monetary offset. And we're sort of sad that we couldn't go higher to match the sort of national market rate or even the regional market rate. But of course, we are limited by statute, and they recognize that as well. So we did not hear from anyone who was in opposition to this rate increase. So only heard from folks in the affirmative. Any questions about the public comments that we received? Pretty straightforward. Okay, go to the next slide. So here we are, having received those comments and no suggestions to alter the rule language, which is pretty straightforward, change in a single number. We are now here before council to deliberate on this rulemaking.
Okay, Vice Chair Condon.
Mr. Chair, I move that the council adopt the proposed carbon monetary offset rules as presented in the staff report.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, then Secretary Cornett, could you please call the roll?
Katie Imes,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Kent Howe, Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Marcy Grail.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jackman. That was well done.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yes.
So we were running a little bit ahead of schedule. We had sort of a break between agenda items C and D, which
Yeah.
we can certainly do, or you can continue to move forward with the next agenda item D. And then again, see how far that goes or how long that takes and decide either to take a break after that or go straight into the public comment period. So really council's choice.
What's the pleasure of the council? Keep going? Okay. I see some keep going signs anyway. So I guess we'll move on to item D, the nuclear research reactor permanent rulemaking, another action item. And Tom Jackman, the rules coordinator, will present this item. You got the floor, Tom.
All right, so here we are with another rulemaking at the exact same position as the prior agenda item. This time with respect to rules governing research reactors in the state of Oregon. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Yes. So we're going to discuss again the background. We're going to review the rulemaking language, and spoiler alert, there were no public comments received. So the review of that is going to be real brief in that there won't be one. And that will bring us to council consideration of the adoption of permanent rules. Next slide. So I don't need to go over the slide again. We just did it. We are here at the end to consider adoption of permanent rules. Go ahead and go next slide. So just as a reminder, the intent of this rulemaking was to sort of remove the annual reporting mismatch between Oregon and the rules and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission rules regarding annual reporting requirements that were off by like 4 months, which the researchers, reactor operators reached out to us and basically said, hey, this is really annoying that we have these 2 annual reports that have a lot of the same information, but they're offset by such a great amount. It just creates extra work for them. So that began this rulemaking. And of course, we thought, well, we're not going to just do a rulemaking and not look at the surrounding rules to make sure there aren't any other changes that need to be made. So then as part of that effort, and we engaged all the sort of stakeholders and persons of interest at the state who would care about these requirements, the feedback suggested that we should also unify the instant written report deadline from 10 to 14 days, which is also in line with the NRC requirements. Go to the next slide. So that was the change 1 and change 2. The third change there that we're also proposing today was actually a result of a discussion had at the previous council meeting. So the 2 research reactor operators also requested a change to the timeline for incident reporting directly to council before the written report, which currently says in 2A and 3A regarding 2 different types of incidents that the operators of those reactors promptly notify council of the incident. Their NRC requirements say for similar types of incidents that they have to report to the NRC by the following working day, and they wanted to change that. The advice I gave, or the suggestion I gave at the previous council meeting, was that we retain the promptly language, given that there could be incidents that we want to hear about sooner than the following working day, and that we have probably a greater interest in our own state perhaps than the NRC does. I don't know. But at the direction of council, we included language that states that kept promptly, but will add no later than the following working day. So that at least provides some direction and clarity to those reactor operators so that they are not sort of left. They were sort of unhappy with the vagueness. So this allows for sort of the rule language to suggest that there could be reasons to do it sooner, but now they know that is more closely aligned with the NRC requirements in that it's no later than the following working day. Any questions about any of that, the development of how we got where we're at? So it's just these 3 changes here. Although in the third line item, it would be to 2 different rules, but it would be the same rule language being added. Hearing nothing, I would ask you to go to the next slide, Nancy. So again, no public comments were submitted during the public comment period from anyone. So, and we didn't hold a hearing because we sort of anticipated that there was not really a whole lot of interest in this. Basically, there's a small group of people that really care about this, and we already heard from them before the public comment period began. Okay, next slide. Here we are at the council deliberation. I will turn it over to you.
Okay, Mr. Jackson, good report. Any comments, suggestions? If none, then would someone like to make a motion? This is an action item.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councilor Devlin.
Mr. Chair, I move that the council adopt the proposed nuclear research reactor rules as presented in attachment 1 to the staff report.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Vice Chair Condon?
Second that motion.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, Secretary Cornett, could you please call the roll?
Richard Devlin,
Aye.
Kent Howe,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Marcy Grail, Katie Imes,
Yes.
Cindy Condon.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Cornett. We're at a point we can either move on to public comment or take a break. Any druthers?
Do the public comments.
What was that?
Please do the public comments.
Let's do the public comment. Okay. So we'll do that next. This time is reserved for the public to address the council regarding any item within council jurisdiction that's not otherwise closed for comment. And those comment items that are closed for public comment include the Mist Natural Gas Underground Storage Amendment 13 Draft Proposed Order, the Sunstone Solar Project Draft Proposed Order, and the monetary offset rulemaking, and lastly, the research reactor rulemaking. So with that, I've established, well, let's see, Nancy, can you tell me how many people are on the phone or on the webinar that want to comment?
At this time, I don't see any hands raised. Oh, hold on one moment. I do. I see Daniel S. That's the only person who has their hand raised at this time.
Okay, so I think we can go ahead and take let's see, Mr. Esk's public comment. Can you unmute him or whatever's needed to be done so we can hear him?
All right, Daniel, you're muted, or your mic is unmuted if you'd like to go ahead and make your comment.
Good morning, Council. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. My comment, I'm requesting a contested case hearing for the Mist Natural Gas.
First of all, could you give us your name and address?
Yeah, I apologize. My name is Daniel Schatz. That's SCHATZ. And my address is 29071 Zimmerman Road in Rainier, Oregon. My zip code is 97048. And I'm requesting a contested case hearing for the Mist Natural Gas Underground Storage Facility Amendment 13. I submitted a written comment, but I'm more than happy to go over the concerns for the council. My first concern is that
Mr. Schatz, I need to stop you right now. So the comment period for the draft proposed order on Mist is closed. So
Correct.
We can't take any comments. We have not yet issued our proposed order, which would then trigger the deadline to submit a request for a contested case. So we're not there yet in the process. So we will get there. The last agenda item on today's council meeting will be the council's review of the draft proposed order for missed amendment number 13. Council will provide their responses to staff. Staff will then take those comments as well as all the other comments, make changes in the form of the proposed order, issue that, and then once we issue that, there will be since you commented, you will receive that as well as a sort of articulation of how to request a contested case in there. But it's premature. We're not at that stage yet.
I apologize. I thought this was the moment to request that contested case.
Nope,
Please
fine.
go ahead with your meeting then.
Any other comments you have on anything else outside of missed?
No, sir.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schatz.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Nancy, for public comment?
I do not see any hands raised at this time, Mr. Chair, but I will go ahead and just remind everybody how to actually raise their hand in case they wanted to make a comment. So if you are on the webinar, of course, the bottom right of the main windows is a set of icons. You click on that participant. And at the bottom of that window is a hand icon, and you click that to raise your hand. And once you're done commenting, you can click that again to lower your hand. If you are on the phone, press *3 on your telephone keypad to raise your hand. And when you're finished commenting, press *3 again to lower your hand. There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay. I think we've given opportunity for anyone to make public comment by phone or on the webinar. So we'll close the public comment. And what do councilors want to do as far as break or moving up forward?
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may, I believe the next agenda item is mine, which should probably take 5-ish minutes. And then that may be a good break because the review of the misdraft proposed order may take a little bit of time. You can certainly kind of push through that one if you want, but my agenda item will be quick.
Okay, let's go ahead and do the Yellow Rosebush Energy Center hearing officer appointment. It's an action item, and Todd Cornett, the Assistant Director for Siting and Council Secretary, will present this item. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Todd Cornett. I'm the Assistant Director for Siting at the Oregon Department of Energy and the Secretary to the Energy Facility Siting Council. So today I'm going to talk about the potential appointment of a hearing officer for the Yellow Rosebush Energy Center application. Nancy, if you can move to the next slide, please. So you can see an overview of the project on the screen. This is a solar PV project, 800 megawatts. It will be located on 8,000 acres or 12.6 square miles. It is approximately 9 miles east of Maupin. The facility would be primarily located in Wasco County. There is an alternative transmission line, interconnect line that would be located in Sherman County. So that's just an alternative that may or may not happen. The project is proposed on private land, all of which is zoned exclusive farm use. The applicant is the Yellow Rosebush Energy Center LLC, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Savion LLC, which in turn is their, I believe, their renewable energy division of the Royal Dutch Shell Company. And we are at the very early stages still of the application process. So the preliminary application was submitted in late August, and we're still reviewing that for completeness. Next slide, please. This gives you a little bit of perspective of the location. So you can see the city of Maupin in Wasco County, the city of Grass Valley in Sherman County, and then the project location has a purple boundary. It's kind of hard to see, which is why I put the arrow in there. If you can move to the next slide, please. So this is a more detailed version. So you can see the property or the project site boundary where all the solar panels would be located. Next slide, please. So yeah, with every application, there's a mandatory contested case. Whether or not there are participants in the contested case, there always has to be a contested case. So council is obligated to appoint a hearing officer for each application. And we are, as you're aware, currently using the Office of Administrative Hearings. So this is a state agency that provides a forum for citizens and businesses to dispute state agency actions, even though at that point, in our process, it's not an action yet. It's still a part of the process. They have 65 administrative law judges, and they provide services to approximately 70 state agencies. 70 state agencies. Most state agencies have a legal requirement to use the Office of Administrative Hearings. FSEC is one of the few that does not have that statutory obligation. We're exempt. However, even though you are exempt from having to use them, they do provide good service. They have the expertise, and they've been helping us with this phase in our process since 2017. You can see the list of projects where they have been appointed as hearing officers. Next slide, please. So the recommendation is to appoint Kate Triana, Administrative Law Judge Triana has been previously appointed by council as the hearing officer for the Nolan Hills Wind Power Project and ran that contested case phase. She has also been appointed as the Sunstone the hearing officer for the Sunstone Solar Project. That has not quite reached the contested case phase, very soon, but not quite there. And she is Oregon State Bar certified, has been with OAH since 2013, and has presided over contested cases for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of State Lands, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Department of Forestry, and the Department of Transportation, among others. And you can see Administrative Law Judge Triana has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Colorado State University and a JD from Willamette University. And next slide, please. You can see then the department's recommendation as that you appoint ALJ Triana as the hearing officer for the Yellow Rosebush project. But you certainly also have the option to not appoint her. And then last slide, please, Nancy. Then with that, I will turn it over to council for your deliberation.
Okay, any questions or comments from council? I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Assistant Director and Council Secretary Cornett. This is an action item. We need someone to make a motion.
Chair Howell.
Vice Chair Condon.
I move that council appoint Administrative Law Judge Kate Triana from the Oregon Office of Administrative Hearings as the hearing officer for the draft proposed order, public hearing, and contested case proceedings for the Yellow Rosebush Energy Center as recommended by staff.
Do we have a second?
This is Counselor Grail. I second the motion.
Okay, we've got motion and second. Secretary Cornett, could you please call the roll? I guess first, is there any discussion? Okay, Secretary Cornett, could you please call the roll?
Marcy Grail,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Kent Howe,
Yes.
Katie Imes,
Yes.
Dan Byer,
Yes.
Richard Devlin. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Okay, shall we take a break now before we move to the missed item? I'm seeing some head nods. Okay, so let's take what, a 10-minute break? Okay, 10 minutes means we'll return at 9:45. Okay.
Chair Howe, I'm here.
Okay, good. We've got a quorum, so we're ready to start back.
I'm here.
Great. This is the Mist Natural Gas Underground Storage Facility draft proposed order for Amendment 13 for council review. It's an information item. And we have Kathleen Sloan, Senior Siting Analyst, that'll present this item. So Ms. Sloan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Howe. Good morning, members of council. My name for the record is Kathleen Sloan. I am a senior siting analyst with the Oregon Department of Energy Siting Division. And as Chair Howe mentioned, we're here to do council's review of the draft proposed order for Mist Underground Natural Gas Storage Facility request for Amendment 13. Next slide. Thank you. So just very quickly, I just wanted to give you an outline of this presentation. I'm going to give a very brief context overview of the facility, the requested amendment, and the DPO. I will also give you a overview of just the hearing and the public comments that we did receive. And the main point of this agenda item is number 3, the council discussion. Council has the opportunity to make any comments or recommendations to the department for the preparation of a proposed order. Next slide. And also, just as a reminder, council can interrupt or ask me questions anytime through the presentation, but I am going to try to push through these slides pretty quickly to get to the council discussion section. So just as a refresher, this is an existing facility. It was approved in 1981. It's been amended. The site certificate has been amended 12 times. It is a approved natural gas underground storage facility that has multiple components and multiple state jurisdictions and other authorities that oversee the facility. Next slide. So this is just a quick visual overview of the approved facility as it exists, where it's located. It's near the community of Mist in the northwestern corner of the state in Columbia County. The site boundary itself is over 5,000 acres. The existing approved facility is comprised of a gas pipeline that was approved in Amendment 11, a power line that connects to the compressor station. We have a North Mist compressor station with 1 approved storage well by Dukami, and then there is Miller Station. And there are, if you go to the next slide, we'll look at what is being proposed for RFA 13. So the changes that are being proposed for the facility, there's no change in the proposed site boundary, but there is an increase in the proposed output, what they call the daily throughput, and that MMSCFD stands for million standard cubic feet per day. There will be an increase in the amount of brake horsepower in the compression equipment that they would want to install. There's also a proposal to develop these underground storage wells. They want to replace this part of the electrical power line, and they also want to install these interconnecting pipelines between these proposed new wells, which would be developed at the facility. And then also included are these temporary staging areas, one of which would be converted after the project to part of the permanent Miller Station facility. Next slide. So this is kind of just the visual representation of what I described. Up in the north top right corner of the first image to your left the yellow is the storage, the temporary laydown areas. The storage wells are more in the center of that image, the development in that facility. And the next two slides show a little bit more of a close-up. So just the center is the North Mist, down at the lower right is the Miller Station proposed changes. So this close-up will give you a better overview of what is being proposed where, and the request for an amendment. And so that little kind of lemon football shaped area at the Miller Station laydown area, that would be the parcel that would be added to the permanent facility boundary at Miller Station. Next slide. And this is a close-up of what is being proposed in the North Mist area. So we have an existing approved storage well. The proposal is to expand that to add these 3 other ones and the interconnecting transmission between us. And I'm going to talk a little bit very briefly about what is and is not within our site certificate. The wells themselves are not. So just realize there's a proposal for this facility that includes expansion that is some of which components are not included in the FSEC site certificate or under our authority. Next slide. So very quickly, I did want to emphasize this slide just for people on the phone and also for council of where we are. The department issued the draft proposed order in August 15th. We issued a public notice, opened it up for public comment. That we also held a public hearing in person in Claxony, Oregon. Council was at that hearing, also participated. At the end of that public hearing, the public comment period closed. Council held the record open to allow the certificate holder, who is Northwest Natural, should have mentioned that sooner. Northwest Natural Gas Company is the certificate holder, to respond to those comments. And they did. They responded to those comments within the time frame allowed by council. And so we are here now today to do council's review of the draft proposed order. And because there's been over a month since public comment period closed, we've also had an opportunity to review and evaluate comments. And so we'll summarize some of those comments as part of this presentation. Council will have the opportunity to make comments today, give recommendations to the department on changes to be made in a proposed order. The department will go on to the next step and issue a proposed order sometime within 30 days after today. At which time we will also issue a public notice of the proposed order and an opportunity to request a contested case. And that is the point that I wanted just to emphasize, is for the commenters that have commented, that are on the call, who are interested in this step. When we issue the proposed order, we will issue a notice. That notice of proposed order will also include an opportunity to request a contested case, and that is the time to request a contested case. And then we'll move through the process as it continues through the chevrons to the right. Okay, next slide. Next slide, okay. So just as a refresher, give some context to council. Everything in the proposed amendment 13 is open for comment for council's review. And as I mentioned, there are a couple of things that we just kind of wanted to emphasize, which is anything that's been previously approved in the original site certificate or the 12 previous amendments is not open for reconsideration, I guess is what I would say. The wells, the actual injection withdrawal wells, storage wells, whether they're owned by Northwest Natural or some other entity, those are under the jurisdiction and authority of DEGAMI, not FSEC. Same for the wellheads. Issues or concerns related to fracking, anything like that, that people might have concerns about, really are outside the scope of council's review and our review in the draft proposed order. Thank you. Next slide. So this is where I'm going to briefly summarize for context some of the comments that we did receive during the public comment period. I would like to note that in the staff report, we have included a table 1, which is a much more detailed evaluation of the comments received than what is going to be on the slides that I'm going to scroll through really quickly. The purpose of this is just to set it up for council's discussion. So we did receive 10 written comments on the record of the public comment period and 2 oral commenters in addition to council comments on the draft proposed order at the public hearing. And we have evaluated and reviewed all of those comments. And there are a couple of things I wanted to point out in the written comments, just really quickly. A few commenters submitted what appears to be the same comment multiple times. They're included in your packet as submitted. I've not gone through a verbatim comparison to see if they're identical. If they're identical, they would be treated as one comment. But in respect for the fact that they made multiple submissions of what appear to be the same comment, they're in your packet. And those are in attachment 2 of the staff report for council. So very briefly, the way we evaluated the comments is we look at the comment content, try to summarize what is the comment, what is the nature of the comment, any recommendations that we might have, also where and if applicable, the certificate holder Northwest Natural responded to those comments. And so this first slide is really the comments that upon review, we're not really recommending any changes in the proposed order based upon our review of those comments, in part because as we said in our more detailed evaluation, as we looked into this, we're not at this time recommending any changes, but that is our initial preliminary evaluation and recommendation of these comments. I'm not going to get too labored into that. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So in the next couple of slides, it's a little more focused discussion of the comments that we received. And so we tried to relate these to our standards, since that is the requirement for evaluating on our part. How does this relate to our process and our standards? So there was an issue raised in a comment letter that was submitted by the Green Energy Institute, and it's co-signed by other environmental organizations, including the Sierra Club, Columbia River Keeper, Breach. I think there is one other entity that might escape me, but they're all on the letterhead of the letter. They all signed on to this letter, and it really is comment related to our needs standard. And the bottom line assessment evaluation that we took away from this letter was that the commenters are asking FSEC to adopt a needs standard into your existing regulations and then apply that standard to this facility to deny the amendment request.
Mr.
The
Chairman.
certificate holder. Okay, go ahead. Yes,
Yes,
please interrupt me if you want me to stop.
Councillor Devlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify, I believe the comments you're referring to, that you referred to in significant detail, is the same 11-page letter that we had received but did not have available at the last meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it is included in your council staff report. So,
And
and
so-
like I said, the table one, yeah,
So what they're
Sorry.
asking you to do in that letter is basically to adopt a new rule and apply it retroactively.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll get to our response to this comment on the next slide. But I did
Thank you,
want to
Mr. Chair.
summarize. Certificate holder did respond, sorry. Certificate holder did respond to comments, noted that this is a non-generating facility, so the references to House Bill 2021 did not really apply. Also noted that House Bill 3630 did allow ODO to have the discretion to determine the best strategy for how to apply this House bill requirements, and did not prohibit the expansion of existing facilities. And that was part of the certificate holders' responses. Again, we're boiling this down to some salient points. I don't want to oversimplify, the comments themselves or the responses, and just point people to the appropriate attachments in the staff report, include them in full. So the next slide will give you our department response to this comment, just so council knows what we're thinking. So we also recognize that there would be formal rulemaking that would be required in order for council to adopt such a standard in order to apply it to this amendment request. In terms of practicality, that's a whole process, and at the time it doesn't exist. So goes to the next bullet. We must follow our rules unless they are properly amended or repealed. And, there isn't a clear legal basis on how council would deny this request. And for those reasons, we're not recommending any changes in the proposed order in response to this comment. That's the department's initial evaluation and recommendation. Again, I can pause here, or I can just keep moving to the next comment. I only have a couple of these slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to council for a fuller discussion, and we can go back and visit any of these.
Councilor Devlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make it clear that I am satisfied with staff's explanation. I can't foresee a situation where an agency would attempt to adopt a new rule and then apply it retroactively. Plus, I'd have to question legal counsel whether we would have authority to adopt such a rule if non-generating facilities are not covered in the statute.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions at this point? Okay, Ms.
Chairman Howell, if I could just respond briefly
Councilor
to Councilor Devlin's comment. You do have the authority to adopt a needs standard for surface facilities related to underground gas storage facilities. You have not done that. And Kate is correct that in order to do that, you would have to adopt a new rule, and you're correct that you would then have to apply it essentially retroactively to this application. But if you so chose to adopt such a needs standard, you would have that authority.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Councilor Devlin.
Just to legal counsel, it would be relatively problematic wouldn't it be, to apply a rule retroactively?
All agencies are creatures of statute. You only have the authority to do what you're authorized to do in statute. I am not aware of a statute that would allow you to do this. If they cared to petition to have anyone is free to petition an agency to adopt a rule If they cared to petition FSEC to adopt this rule, they could do that. And in that petition, they could lay out their argument, articulate why they believe you would have the authority to delay or deny this application pending your adoption of such a rule. But I am not aware of a clear legal avenue for you to delay or deny this application pending adoption of such a rule. Certainly open to hearing any arguments that they cared to make if they chose to petition you to adopt such a rule.
Chair Howe?
Yes, Councillor Byer.
So thank you to Councillor Devlin for raising the issue. I had the same question about whether or not we had the statutory authority to even move forward with the rulemaking on this. I appreciate our legal counsel's advice that we should not be applying rules retroactively. So thank you both for that.
Any other discussion or comments at this point? Vice Chair Condon?
Chair Howe, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the comments as well, but I am wondering if, as we contemplate rulemaking in the future, if we have the statutory authority to have a needs standard for surface facilities, that maybe that's something we should look at in the future. Just a thought.
Noted.
Any other comments? Questions? Okay, Ms. Sloan, I think we'll go back to you.
Okay, thank you, Council, and thank you, Chair Howe. Okay, on to the next slide. So another comment related to the first comment, but kind of not, also included in the same letter, had to do with the definition of related and supporting facilities under ORS 469-300. And in this comment, the commenters identified that there was an error in asserting that that the components are related and supporting facilities in the same way that RFA 11 components were treated as related and supporting facilities. So the certificate holder included a response to this comment in their response letter and referenced that decision in final order on Amendment 11, and looped it back around to the needs standard as well, because these two were kind of related comments, but identified the fact that they didn't really identify an issue with an applicable standard in that comment. So if you go on to the next slide, you'll see our response, our preliminary response. So we concur that with the comment, and we are making that edit in the proposed order to correct that so that it is clear. But we also do not believe that the need standards applies. They are not, even if they're not related and supporting facilities, their components are surface facilities related to an underground natural storage gas facility, and council still has not adopted a need standard for such facilities. So comment has been noted, corrections are being made in what we are preparing in the proposed order. So if anybody wants to pause there, I should just move on to the next slide.
I think you can move on.
Okay. So another comment that was made was the inconsistency with HB 2021 in Oregon's climate policy, because approving this amendment request would increase carbon emissions. The position is that that's inconsistent, and an appeal to council to only approve facilities related to natural gas that are needed. That goes back to the needs standard request. The certificate holder did respond, and they make a point that HB 2021 expressly relates to generating facilities and not non-generating facilities. This is a non-generating facility for the purposes of our site certificate. House Bill 3630 again gives ODO the discretion to figure out how best to develop this policy in response to this statewide policy for climate, and it doesn't prohibit explicitly the expansion of any existing facilities. So that's a certificate holder's response. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see our review and recommendations. So again, we just note that council has not adopted a needs standard for surface facilities related to an underground gas storage reservoir. And recent statutory changes preclude FSEC from approving new or amended facilities that would produce or result in a significant increase of CO2 emissions, respectively, applies to generating facilities and not non-generating facilities. So the definitions matter, and it goes back to the fact that this is a non-generating facility. And so for that reason, the department is not making any recommendations to change anything in the proposed order in response to this comment. And I can pause there if anybody has any comments. I think I only have one more slide. I might have a couple more.
I'm not seeing any hands or questions.
Okay, let's keep going.
Yep.
Next slide. Okay, and then if you look through the comments received, we received a similar comment letter from multiple commenters. So individuals submitted a form letter that was prepared by American Aquifers. Aquifers themselves submitted a comment letter, and the comments based on our evaluation kind of break down into two buckets. One is the question, the validity or the facts in Exhibit H that was submitted as part of the RFA 13, and some assertions about concerns about public health and safety related to potential issues with underground gas storage reservoirs. The letters are in your packet, so you have the ability to take a deep dive into them. But based upon our preliminary evaluation of those comments, the things that related to our standards, they identified a source that they felt had not been utilized in the Exhibit H, and so therefore questioned the validity of that Exhibit H. They also referenced that in terms of the table in the Exhibit H that was summarizing the geological hazards data that was used and relied upon in that Exhibit H as not identifying a fault or more recently identified fault. And they felt that based on this additional information, they felt that the data showed that there was an increased seismic risk, which is something we look for under our structural standard as a result of this newly identified fault. And so basically showing, in their letter, they're making a case that, or making the assertion that there was a change in fact, and that change in fact should change in evaluation. So that's the framework in which we look at this comment. Next slide. So the certificate holder did not respond to this, but we have evaluated this comment ourselves. I'm going to go a little bit more into the ongoing evaluation that we're doing of this comment and this comment letter. But there are a couple of things that we want to note right now. The Exhibit H is, if you look at the actual Exhibit H and the RFA 13, you'll note that there are 2 registered engineer geologist stamps on that report, on that exhibit itself, which shows you that it's actually not only the technical reports attached, but the exhibit itself is prepared by qualified registered engineers and engineering geologists that work for a firm known as Geoengineers. There were 2 site-specific geotechnical reports that are included as attachments to this exhibit to support the conclusions in that Exhibit H and the data that was relied upon. As part of our response and evaluation of this comment, because it is looking at that, we have consulted with our third-party consultant, Haley Aldrich, who also retains qualified geotechnical engineers and geologists, and asked them to peer review both the Exhibit H and also the comments that we received, the comment letter. And then we also submitted that request to Dogami, because Dogami is the state agency that has oversight of not only the wells, but also is the state agency that we consult with as a reviewing agency for the information included in the Exhibit H and the analysis. So my update for you is that we have received a preliminary feedback from Haley Aldrich. An actual report is pending, so we'll have that for the staff report. For the proposed order, we don't have it today. Similarly for Dogami, Dogami is reviewing. They're going to give us a formal comment. Don't have that today, but they have committed to having it to us so that we can include it when we prepare our proposed order, and also give you the staff report. So our information is a little bit TBD as far as additional technical information, but I can give you our preliminary peer review feedback. There was kind of 3 issues identified in that memo from American Aquifers. The Exhibit H appears to be solid. The reference to the USGS 2020 data, it's important to note that is actually an online tool, and the map that is included in the Exhibit H in the comment letter from American Aquifers provides a map that is an output of that tool that is presented as evidence that the information in Exhibit H is flawed. And I guess the qualifier that we've already noted from our own discussions and evaluation and the comments that we got verbally from Haley Aldrich is that that's an online tool, and it's really important to note that that the parameters you put in dictate what comes out. So the sensitivity levels that were set in that model control the output. So that could very well be the difference between what is in their map versus what is in the data in the evaluation that was prepared by Geoengineers. We'll have more on that, I think, in the future, but I just kind of want to provide that context. And I'm going to stop here. I think I only have 1 or 2 more slides.
Chair Howe?
Yes, Councillor Beyer.
So thank you, Kathleen, for the thorough response on the geotech reports. I think including explicit language in the order describing the tool. When I read it, I read study and I thought, oh my goodness, there's a 2020 study that hasn't been included. So having that clarification in your staff report will be very helpful and I think responsive to the comments that were received. So I appreciate the extra effort and having your own consultants or the department's own consultants further reviewing this, because I think it's an important issue and having that kind of backup review is really important. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Chair Hall.
Vice Chair Condon?
Thank you. Hey, I just have a question for my understanding, really. I struggled a little bit with why FSEC didn't have jurisdiction over the facility that Dagami has. And I just want to make sure my understanding is correct that jurisdiction or authority is strictly excluded from our jurisdiction by statute. Am I reading the statute correctly by excluding underground storage, reservoirs, wells, that sort of thing? That makes sense.
I can address that.
Yes, but I would like Patrick to
Sure.
answer that question.
Yeah, you want to look at the definition of energy facility. FSEC has jurisdiction and you issue site certificates when someone applies for a site certificate for an energy facility. That definition is in 469-311, and there are many different definitions, but the particular one you want to look at is the one that talks about a surface facility related to an underground gas storage reservoir. And that explicitly says you have jurisdiction over that, but excluding the underground storage reservoir, the injection, withdrawal, or monitoring wells, and individual wellhead equipment. Those are the two main things, and it goes on, but it explicitly excludes the underground components.
Yes, and thank you. And I was looking at that at the time, and I just wanted to confirm that there wasn't some other thing, some other statute or provision that said something different than that. And again, it's my getting used to the statute.
That's where you want to turn to when you want to, that statute, when you want to understand what energy facilities FSEC has jurisdiction over.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, back to you, Ms. Sloan.
Okay. Next slide. So several commenters, and also included in the American Aquifers comment letter, but also in additional comments, both oral and written, received. We kind of clustered these together, and they're somewhat related to the comments about potential soil contamination as well. And it really is a group of comments that in our process, in trying to filter these through what would be the relevant or related standard, would fall under public services and public health and safety standards for surface facilities related to an underground gas storage reservoir. So there, and I'm putting alleged here because some of these are pretty powerful allegations. I say allegations because they have not yet been proven. It's not to discount the concerns that were raised. It's more just trying to be clear. So there are concerns raised about groundwater and drinking water contamination and the associated impacts to public health as a result of potential groundwater, drinking water contamination, and a series of concerns that were raised about a lack of regulatory oversight and enforcement by other agencies, specifically DEQ and Dogami, for noncompliance of the facility. And they are fairly detailed comments. They're in the oral comment summary and also in the written comment submitted. And I'm just going to move on to the responses here. And these are our preliminary responses, both from the certificate holder and also from the department. So on to the next slide. So these are the certificate holders, a summary of the certificate holders' responses. The certificate holder is aware of these complaints. They assert that there have been several federal and state regulatory agencies, including Dogami, DEQ, even the Oregon Department of Energy, and this U.S. Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, who has the responsibility for monitoring the safety of pipelines. They have reviewed these concerns, and the certificate holders' responses, they have not found any violations. They note that Dogami enforces the storage well design and implementation standards, and those standards are set by this Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, that federal agency, and that the facility operates above that national storage standard. And then they also note their own facility-wide, company-wide efforts for monitoring wellheads, pipelines. They have continuous monitoring. They monitor via a SCADA system, which is that remote system that will alarm them if there's anything going wrong. And they also monitor, they do sightly inspections. And so they have a whole protocol that they outlined in their responses. So that was their response. And if you go on to the next slide, you'll see our response.
Mr. Chair, if I can jump in really quickly. So
Yeah.
Going back to the last issue, Sarah Esterson just forwarded the memo from Haley Aldrich on the kind of structural question that Kate was talking about. So I just wanted to see, we haven't really had a time to take a look at that and evaluate that. We'll certainly, as she indicated, any response that they've given, as well as Dogami, build that into the proposed order. Just seeing if you'd like us to forward that to you, or would you rather wait to see it later on within the, when you're reviewing the proposed order, as the final order?
And we just received that too.
Yeah, it just came in.
Yeah.
I think it's fine to just review when you present it with the proposed order, but I'll listen to concerns of other counselors. What do you say?
So Chair Howe, this is Ann Beyer.
Yeah.
If after you all review this submittal and you think it would help us as we have further review, it's an issue that needs to be addressed. So I'm curious as to what the findings were, and it would help me if we had it before the staff report. And while I'm here talking about the wellhead concerns, jumping ahead, have we got anything in writing from the regulatory agencies regarding their findings or their monitoring of these particular wells? I appreciate the certificate holder's response, but just wondering if we have anything in the record from the regulatory agencies. Thank you.
That do you want me to respond? Do you want to go to the next slide? I think this might be good.
So can we put a pause on that before you respond? I just wanted to bring up the other alternative is we can forward that memo to you, take a pause for 5 minutes. It's 2 pages, so it's not very long. Could take a 5-minute break to allow you to review it and then come back to make sure, you know, again, we don't have the Dogami one, but we do have the Haley Aldrich one, so you can take a look at that if you want before we finalize the meeting today. It's entirely your choice.
Does council want to see that? We're ahead of schedule quite a ways. Seems like it wouldn't take too long to take a look at the 2-page letter.
Okay, I will forward it to you, and maybe we can then move through the rest of the slides, and then we can take a break at the end of that and come back if that would work.
That works.
Okay. No, that sounds good. And I did have a chance to skim it. I think I hit the high points that already, but I think it supports what I also said in my initial verbal feedback. So I think that sounds great. So why don't we go to the next slide? And this, I think, will help answer or start to address some of Councilmember Breyer's question comments. Just so you know, we, the department, in November of 2022, so almost 2 years ago, received a similar related complaint about concerns of drinking water well contamination from one of the commenters that also submitted similar comments on this draft proposed order. So this is related, but I realized the date. So this was when Wally Adams was also with our office, and he was the primary person who followed up on this. But I was at some of those internal staff meetings where we went through compliance, so I do remember talking about this. So anyways, when we received that complaint, the department did take it seriously, and we did initiate our own compliance investigation. As a result of that complaint, we coordinated with both Oregon DEQ and Dogami, and they both responded in writing to the department as part of that complaint. This information will be included and updated as appropriate in the proposed order in response to comments. So I don't want to get too down in the weeds of the details. I just want you to be aware that we are aware of this complaint and that these have been investigated. And the result of that complaint in our process of review and the responses that we got from Dogami and DEQ, there was no evidence that the wells in question had ever been used by Northwest Natural. We had no evidence that the site certificate had been violated or there were any conditions that were broken. And after our review in coordination with those agencies, we closed the complaint in November of 2022. We have not seen any evidence that Northwest Natural facilities are associated with these alleged issues, and there's no evidence that the RFA proposed changes would change that outcome. And for that reason, our preliminary recommendations is that we're not recommending substantive changes to the proposed order. I'm going to stop there just momentarily. Okay.
Councilor Imes.
I just had a quick question. I noticed you had DEQ and I don't know how to pronounce the other agency very well, but those are the two main agencies that would handle these kinds of complaints, as well as ODO. But is the Oregon Health Authority ever been part of this conversation and the complaint?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Well, I also had the same question or thought as Counselor Byer as far as the reports from the agencies, because this is pretty high level what you're presenting today. And so I think it would be good. I would personally, as a council member, like to know more about any reports that have been received by these regulatory agencies. Thank you.
Chair Howe.
Yes, Councilor Byer.
So Kathleen, thank you so much for reminding us of this previous compliance investigation. That goes a long way in addressing my issue. But if there are other findings from the state regulatory agencies supporting the finding, that would be helpful, but I agree with your recommendation at this point. Thank you.
And just to note, thank you for your comments. If I didn't clarify it before, Dogami is reviewing. I am expecting written comments from them. We just didn't have them for today. So that would be the reviewing agency, and I'll follow up with DEQ too. I think what's important, just for council's awareness, is that the DEQ link there is that, you know, the drinking water wells, that's all under Safe Drinking Water Act. That all gets through, that all runs through the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality through delegation from US EPA. So there are state agencies that have very clear authorities for that particular concern and topic. So it's not that other people aren't aware or aren't doing their part. Next slide. So this is a comment that we received from Councilmember Condon during council's comments on the draft proposed order during the public hearing. Councilmember Condon had some questions about the potential for fugitive emissions from the facility pipelines and wanted to know what measures Northwest Natural would take to ensure that there were none, or to how, you know, what's their process, what do they do? That was basically the heart of the comment. So the certificate holder did provide responses, note that they rely on the SCADA and telemetry to monitor in real time all of their equipment from remote sources to detect leaks all along the system. They also do these biannual aerial patrols. They do foot surveys and foot patrols, and they have a requirement to report any fugitive emissions on an annual basis to Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, who also has the authority under the Clean Air Act. So they are required to report to DEQ, and DEQ has a process enforcement mechanism if there's any issues identified. And that was in their response. That was the certificate holder response. You go to the next slide.
Chair Howe and Kate, just a quick question. I didn't see it in the material, but do we by any chance have a copy of any of the reports to DEQ? Just as
not. I'm sure that they could be obtained, but that is not something I have in my arsenal.
I guess the point of my question was, yes, what's their process for minimizing those? But it would be interesting to know what the reports reveal. So,
okay,
thank you.
Put a pin in that one too. Okay, and those are the kind of comments that we can address in a proposed order too. Like if there's additional information to support that, we'll update it. The certificate holder responses are continuing. onto the slide. Sounds like someone wants to say something. No? Okay. Okay. And then again, as part of the certificate holders' responses, just noting that Dogami also has oversight of the storage wells, and the pipelines are subject to the regulations set by the pipeline hazards. I can't remember what the rest of it stands for. Materials, something administration. Okay. We had it on our previous slide. So for the department's recommendation, we did, because we have additional facts, we might even have more additional facts if we obtain some to respond to Councilmember Condon's comment. We will incorporate those as additional facts into the proposed order. Next slide. And as we are all aware, Council just adopted a new offset rate for the monetary path option for the carbon offset. This will result in a change in the table 19 in the proposed order in a reshoot of the estimated amount of the offset costs to be paid by the certificate holder. I guess a couple of things I want to just cover real briefly. The rate went from 427 to 640. And the DPO, these are estimated costs based upon estimates provided by the certificate holder for the emissions and the exceedances. Like they look at the equipment, they're estimating based on what they know about the equipment output, what the final emissions will be. We have a site certificate condition that requires them to true that up before construction. So they have to have picked their equipment and figured it out. And so they will reshoot that total excess CO2 estimate.
Chair,
That's on the second
Chair Howe
line.
and Katie,
Councilman, yeah, I hear you.
this is Cindy, and I think somebody else's microphone might be on. I'm hearing a lot of noise, and it looks like it might be from the energy siting host. That their microphone is on. So is anybody else getting that or hearing that?
I am.
Can everybody turn off their mics if they're not speaking? That way we can kind of try to minimize the feedback.
And my mic has to be on to record.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but I'm in a silent room, so I don't know why you'd be hearing anything from my mic.
It's like a weird audio echo on the internet. I think we've had this before. And when we shut off the owl, it went away, but I don't think we're using an owl today.
I'm not using an owl.
Yeah, so I don't know what the cause is, but I can hear it.
I think
too.
it seems to be better now. I think, somebody might have turned off their mic that was creating feedback. So I'm not hearing the same feedback right now.
Okay, so was there a comment to Cindy or Councilmember Condon?
I will have a comment on this, but I
Okay.
just will let you finish. It was getting,
Okay,
I couldn't
okay.
hear you well enough.
Okay. So anyways, so we will update the table 19 in the proposed order that shows these total estimated offset costs. Just wanted to make sure that people are aware that this is an estimate. It will get trued up by site certificate condition. The monetary path option was an option that the certificate holder chose in the request for amendment 11. and they met that standard. They identified the Climate Trust as the recipient of the monetary path payment. And that part will continue. What would change is the rate, the final amount of offset owed based on the actual trued up emissions in exceedance. And then that would be predicted out as over the life of the facility. There's some additional kind of contracting fees added in there for the implementation of the contract. And then a payment to the, this would be the cost to the certificate holder to make that payment to the Climate Trust for that offset funds required. So in the proposed order, this will be updated to both reflect the change that council just adopted, the new rate. And again, it will get trued up as a requirement in a site certificate condition prior to construction. So I just wanted to make that clear. And it is a path that the facility chose to use in the final order, and council approved in the final order of Amendment 11. And so for Amendment 13, with the requested changes, they're proposing basically to take the same path, just different numbers involved. And I believe that really is my last slide, and I will move on to council discussion and council comments. Yes.
Vice Chair Condon.
Thank you, Chair Howe. So could you go back to the previous slide, please? I wrote I have real concerns about the offset, how we're figuring the offsets. And I wrote a comment that I hope summarizes and makes sense to people, but so I apologize for reading it, but because I have it written down, I'm going to read it. Staff has provided us with information regarding the excess gas emissions, which must be offset, and that's the metric tons. And I see nothing in the evidence or findings of fact which tells us the actual emission offsets which can be purchased at the expected rate, or at the rate we've set today of $6.40. As we've discussed previously, the offset rate we've approved is well below the market rate for carbon offsets. I believe, given the cost of carbon offsets today, this will result in the inability of the Climate Trust to purchase the number of carbon credits, offset credits necessary to offset the projected greenhouse gas emissions from the project. It's difficult for me to believe that the legislature intended one of the pathways to be a relatively inexpensive way to purchase offsets, which really don't offset the excess gas, greenhouse gas emissions the statute and rules are addressing. In my opinion, as I have read the material and provided, without further evidence to the contrary, the offset credits proposed for purchase for this project will not be sufficient to meet the carbon dioxide emissions standard or the intent of the statute, or allow FSEC to make the determination we need to make. So I hope that makes sense. In this table, we've got the 747,556 figure. We've got the $6.40, and that gives rise to the 5 million. But what will that 5 million offset? And I just don't think it's adequate.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Mr. Chair, may I make a comment?
I'm sorry, I wasn't unmuted. So yes, Secretary Cornett, please.
Thank you. And we absolutely respond or evaluate your comment, Vice Chair Condon, and respond to that in the proposed order. So just for everybody, oftentimes statutes are written in a more general way, and then the administrative rules are designed to really flesh those out. This is one of the examples where your administrative rules almost are identical to the statutes. And so there's really no variation or very limited variation. So, we have evaluated these. We believe we, evaluate them correctly and implement them correctly, and that the language, it's on the slide, the estimates on the slide are what's allowable by statute and rule. Again, we will look at that very carefully and make sure we respond to it, but that is our current assessment, is that that's as much as we are legally allowed to do at this point. But again, we'll review and evaluate.
And thank you. If I can just follow up on that.
Vice Chair Condon.
Thanks. And in reading the statute, and what I'm hesitating, the reason I'm hesitating is in 469503 C, small c, capital C, it reads, the applicant or a third party agrees to provide funds in an amount deemed sufficient to produce the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions necessary to meet the applicable carbon dioxide emission standard. To me, that's a greenhouse gas emissions measurement, not a dollar cost. So that's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah, and I think if that's all the statutes said, I think we would be in agreement with you. But there are a lot of other statutes that have to be evaluated, which create the the pathways, which create the monetary offset rate and how the calculations go. So it all has to be looked at. And so that's what we're going to do is, we'll verify and we'll make sure that we look at all of the statutes or rules again, and not just that one. That one's important, but, and I agree, if that was the only one, this would probably be a different conversation. But because there's a whole host of other ones that have to be evaluated, I believe that language sort of references the implementation of everything else to get to that level. But that's something that we'll review and respond to.
Thank you. And I will admit, I read the 569503 statute, or 5469 in its entirety, and I certainly didn't walk through the maze of statutes. So I appreciate the follow-up.
Okay, any further discussion or comments?
So I have sent the Haley Aldrich memo to council. Hopefully you've all received it now.
Yeah.
So we can either, you have the option to deliberate and provide comments on anything that was provided by Ms. Sloan or anything else, or you can put a pause and take 5 minutes to read the memo, and then you can discuss that as well. So whatever your choice is.
Would the council like to take 5 to read the memo? Okay, let's do that. It's 10:55, so at 11 o'clock we'll come back after reviewing this memo.
Hi. Thank you.
What I'm reading is the two earthquake catalog maps don't impact the results from the seismic hazard point of view, and that there's validity in the seismic hazard estimates as presented in Exhibit H. Does that kind of ring true with the way everybody else is reading the letter? I see head nodding from Vice Chair Gray, or Condon.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilor Devlin.
To some degree, I mean, I reviewed the letter, but to some degree, I probably would need more background to understand everything that's within the letter.
I agree.
But one of the comments that in the letter that was made, it seems to me purely logical that if you were to count earthquakes only above 2.5, that would give you one figure. If you can't account all earthquakes that would, register on, I believe, the Richter scale, you probably would have quite a few more, but they probably wouldn't be that meaningful because there are areas in California where obviously earthquakes could be very severe. They could be very severe here, but there are probably just dozens of very small earthquakes that occur every month at a lower level. So I think the comment that you have to know what the inputs are to judge what the outputs are is probably very appropriate.
Is there any comments, from staff that you want to add to interpreting the letter?
I feel like it, this is Kathleen Sloan for the record.
Yeah.
After reviewing it, I would say that, what I will rely upon this letter is just to follow up with our coordination with Dogami as well. They're the experts on the seismic risk and the data to be relied upon and used. I think that is, it's useful information. It supports our evaluation. But there's more input, I think, that we want from Dogami's review as well.
Okay.
Chair Howe?
Yes, Councilor Byer.
Thanks for getting this letter to you. For me, what this letter does is says that, yes, the information provided in Appendix X considers the range of data and information that's out there, and that there is some variability on how information is evaluated, the different inputs to consider in making these assessments. But I'm more comfortable knowing that every stone was unturned in terms of the seismic hazard data that's available. So thank you for getting that to us.
Any other comments from council or questions? And Ms. Sloan, have you gone through everything you wanted to present?
I believe I have. So I think if we just, we reached the point where it really is, if council wants to make any recommendations to us as a department for consideration or inclusion in the proposed order, as Councilmember Condon has read her comments to us, we will make sure that we take them into consideration and address them in our proposed order. Any other comments received from council as well. We'll update any additional information from Dogami in our proposed order and our staff report on the proposed order when we issue it. So if there's any more comments from council, otherwise my presentation is done.
Okay. Any last comments from council? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So I guess that concludes then item G. And so,
okay.
Is there anything else for today? Okay, well, I guess what I'll do then is say that the time is now 11:06 and the October 25th, 2024 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council is adjourned. We'll meet on November 14th in both remote and in person. in Madras, and go Ducks. And Counselor Grail, have a good vacation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks
Yeah.
all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Oh, you're so welcome.